I never thought I'd become the kind of woman people destroy in Reddit comments. If you asked anyone in my life 2 years ago who was the loyal one in our relationship, they would have pointed at me instantly. I was the organized girlfriend. The dependable one. The woman who remembered anniversaries, packed lunches, stayed up during his panic attacks, and defended him when his own friends mocked him for being too soft. And somehow, I still cheated on him. Worse than that, I cheated on him during his birthday party. Even worse? I cheated on him with the one person he specifically asked me to stay away from. I know how that sounds already. Trust me, I've replayed it in my head every night since it happened. My boyfriend Ethan turned 26 last November. He hated birthdays, but I spent weeks planning one anyway because I thought maybe if someone finally made him feel important, he'd stop acting like the world was temporary. We'd been together for 4 years by then. Lived together for almost 2. Everyone assumed we'd get married, including me. The party was at this rented lake house about an hour outside the city. Nothing crazy. Around 15 people. Music, drinks, cheap decorations, bonfire outside. I booked everything secretly because I wanted it to feel special. What I didn't tell Ethan was that I invited Mason. And before you immediately say, well, there's your problem, let me explain. Mason wasn't an ex. That would have actually been simpler. He was Ethan's old best friend. The kind of friendship that looked inseparable until suddenly it wasn't. They stopped talking after some business disaster I never fully understood. Ethan claimed Mason manipulated him financially. Mason claimed Ethan abandoned him during the worst year of his life. I stayed out of it because every time either of them explained the story, it somehow sounded believable. But there was always tension whenever Mason's name came up. Especially because Mason flirted with me. Not openly enough to start drama. Just enough to make me notice. Little comments. Lingering eye contact. Standing too close during group hangouts years ago. The kind of man who looked at you like he already knew what you sounded like when you moaned. I ignored it for years. Mostly. 3 weeks before the party, Mason messaged me out of nowhere. You still with birthday boy? I should have ignored him. Instead, I answered. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was continuing the conversation after midnight. The third mistake was deleting the chat afterward. I kept telling myself it wasn't cheating because nothing explicit happened. No photos. No sexting. Just conversation. But if you have to hide a conversation from your boyfriend, you already know the truth. Mason had changed since I last saw him. More confident. More reckless. He traveled constantly now, posted pictures from Miami, Berlin, Tokyo. Women were always around him in photos, but never the same one twice. And honestly, part of me liked that he still wanted my attention after all these years. I hate admitting that. When I invited him to the birthday party, I told myself it was for Ethan. Some dramatic reconciliation fantasy. Maybe they'd drink, talk things out, become friends again. Deep down though, I think I just wanted to see Mason in person again. That night at the lake house started perfectly. Ethan smiled more in the first hour than he had in months. Everyone was drinking. Music blasting. People laughing on the deck. At one point Ethan hugged me in front of everyone and whispered, "This is the happiest I've been in a long time." That sentence still ruins me. Because less than 3 hours later, I was in an upstairs bathroom with Mason's hand around my throat while he whispered things that made me forget I even had a boyfriend downstairs. And the worst part? I went upstairs first. I remember the exact moment things stopped being harmless. It was around midnight. Most people were outside near the bonfire, drunk and yelling over terrible early 2000s music. Ethan was downstairs playing beer pong with his cousins, laughing hard enough that I could hear him from the kitchen. And Mason was leaning against the counter watching me pour another drink. Not staring. Watching. There's a difference. You nervous? He asked. I laughed awkwardly. About what? About me being here. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Mason had this calm confidence that felt dangerous because he never forced attention. He just waited for people to give it to him willingly. I shrugged. You and Ethan are adults. That's not what I asked. I should have walked away right there. Instead, I took the drink and leaned against the opposite counter. You've changed, I told him. He smirked slightly. That good or bad? I haven't decided. His eyes moved slowly over me. Not exaggerated. Somehow that made it worse. You still do that thing, he said quietly. What thing? Pretend you don't know exactly what you're doing to people. That line stayed in my head the rest of the night. Because the truth was, I did know. Maybe not completely, but enough. I knew my shorts were too short. I knew Mason noticed every time I tucked my hair behind my ear. I knew I liked the attention more than I should have. And for the first time in years, I felt wanted in a way that wasn't comfortable or safe. Ethan loved me deeply. But Mason desired me. Those are not the same thing. Around 1 in the morning, people started disappearing into rooms upstairs. Couples mostly. A few guests had passed out on couches. The party had shifted into that slower, messier stage where everyone's drunk enough to stop pretending. I went upstairs to use the bathroom in the hallway. That's all I intended to do. I closed the door, stared at myself in the mirror for a second, and honestly thought about how attractive I looked that night. My cheeks were flushed from alcohol, my makeup slightly messy, oversized hoodie hanging off one shoulder. Then someone knocked softly. I knew it was him before I opened the door. Mason stood there holding 2 bottles of water. You disappeared, he said. I went to the bathroom. Obviously. I laughed a little. That was another mistake. He handed me 1 bottle and leaned against the wall beside the door. We were too close already. You know Ethan still hates me, right? He asked. He doesn't hate you. Mason raised an eyebrow. Okay, I admitted. Maybe a little. And you? What about me? His voice lowered slightly. Do you hate me? The hallway suddenly felt too warm. I remember hearing muffled laughter downstairs while my heart started pounding for absolutely no reason I wanted to admit. No, I said quietly. Mason nodded slowly like he'd already known the answer. Then came the sentence that changed everything. You know, he said, I used to feel guilty for wanting you. Every rational thought in my brain screamed at me to leave. Instead, I whispered. Used to. His eyes locked onto mine. Now I just wonder if you ever wanted me to. There are moments where life splits permanently. That was one of them. Because I could have laughed it off. Could have called him an idiot. Could have walked downstairs and kissed my boyfriend and forgotten the entire thing. Instead, I stood there frozen while tension filled the hallway so thick it almost felt physical. Mason stepped closer. Not enough to touch me. Enough that I stopped breathing normally. You should go downstairs, I said weakly. You want me to? I didn't answer. That silence was all the permission he needed. His hand moved to my waist slowly enough that I could have stopped him. I didn't. And when he kissed me for the first time, my brain didn't think about Ethan. That's the part people never understand about cheating. They imagine guilt stops you immediately. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes desire is louder for a few horrible minutes. The kiss lasted maybe 10 seconds before I pulled away, breathing hard. We can't do this. Mason looked at me carefully. But you want to? I hated how accurate that was. Downstairs, everyone was still celebrating my boyfriend's birthday. And upstairs, I was already becoming someone I wouldn't recognize afterward. The craziest part is that I still had Ethan's birthday bracelet on my wrist when I kissed Mason back. A stupid little paper bracelet from the arcade bar we stopped at earlier that evening before driving to the lake house. Birthday boy's girlfriend. I noticed it right after I pulled away from Mason. Like reality briefly punched through the alcohol. I stared at the bracelet while breathing hard, and Mason followed my eyes down to it. That's rough, he muttered. I should have slapped him for that. Instead, I laughed nervously, which somehow made everything feel even more wrong. We seriously need to stop, I whispered. Mason nodded immediately. Okay, that should have been the end of it. But then neither of us moved. That's the thing nobody talks about. Affairs don't usually begin with one giant evil decision. They happen through dozens of tiny failures stacked on top of each other. A pause too long. A look held too long. A hand not removed quickly enough. Mason leaned against the wall beside me while I stared at the floor, trying to calm down. You know what Ethan's problem was? He asked quietly. I looked up instantly. Don't. No, listen. His voice stayed calm. He spent years acting like loving you is enough. I crossed my arms defensively. It is enough. Is it? That question hit harder than it should have. Because for months before the party, something in my relationship had already started fading. Not the love, the tension, the excitement, the feeling that somebody looked at you and thought, I need her right now. Ethan and I had become routine, comfortable, predictable, safe. Mason felt dangerous. And dangerous is addictive when you've been emotionally sleepwalking for too long. I love him, I said quietly. Mason nodded like he believed me. I know. Then why are you doing this? His eyes stayed locked on mine. Because you're letting me. That line shattered me because it forced me to confront the truth. He wasn't manipulating me. He wasn't trapping me. I was participating willingly. Before I could answer, voices echoed upstairs from another room and both of us stepped apart instinctively. For one brief second, I thought maybe the moment was broken. Then Mason reached forward and brushed his thumb under my chin gently. Tiny gesture. Massive mistake. You know it's killing me, he murmured. What? That you keep pretending you don't want this. I opened my mouth to argue. Nothing came out. Because he was right. And he knew it. The tension snapped again after that. He kissed me harder this time, backing me toward the bathroom sink while my brain screamed that this was insane. I remember grabbing his hoodie without even realizing it. Remember the smell of whiskey on his breath. Remember hating myself even while my pulse went wild. Then came the sound that almost ended everything. Ethan's voice downstairs. Laughing. Loud enough that we both froze instantly. I shoved Mason back hard. Oh my God. Reality crashed into me so violently I felt nauseous. I had never cheated before. Never even came close. And suddenly I was upstairs at my boyfriend's birthday party, making out with the one man guaranteed to destroy him if he found out. I'm done, I said immediately. Mason studied me carefully. Okay. But he looked disappointed. And somehow that affected me more than it should have. I fixed my hoodie, checked my makeup in the mirror with shaky hands, and moved toward the door. Before opening it, I turned around. What happened next still confuses me because it felt completely involuntary. I asked him the question. The one question I absolutely should not have asked. If Ethan hadn't dated me first. Mason tilted his head slightly. Yeah? I swallowed hard. Would you have tried? He stared at me for a second too long. Then smiled faintly. I would have ruined my friendship with him for you. That sentence followed me downstairs like smoke. And the worst part? A piece of me liked hearing it. When I went back downstairs, Ethan pulled me straight into a hug. That almost broke me immediately. He was drunk enough to be emotional, smiling like a little kid because everyone actually showed up for him. You disappeared, he said against my hair. Bathroom line, I lied instantly. I expected guilt to hit harder. Instead, adrenaline took over. That scared me more than the cheating itself. Because part of me thought I'd go downstairs, look at Ethan, and immediately confess everything. But humans are terrifyingly good at compartmentalizing when they don't want consequences yet. So I smiled. I laughed. I sat on his lap while his friends told old stories. And all the while I could feel Mason across the room watching me. Not constantly. Just enough. Every accidental glance between us felt radioactive. At around 2 in the morning, Ethan suddenly stood up and clapped loudly. I got something for you, he told me. Everyone started yelling immediately. Proposal. Do it. Ethan turned red instantly. Shut up, idiots. I laughed nervously while my stomach dropped straight into hell. He disappeared upstairs for a minute and came back holding a tiny black jewelry box. Not a ring box, but close enough to make my hands shake. I wasn't gonna do this in front of everyone, he admitted, but I'm drunk now, so whatever. People started cheering again. I remember looking past Ethan for 1 second. Mason was standing near the kitchen island, completely expressionless. That somehow made this worse. Ethan opened the box. Inside was a silver necklace. Simple, elegant, beautiful. There was a tiny engraving on the back. My initials. I know it's not huge, he said softly, but I wanted you to have something that reminds you how important you are to me. That destroyed me more than if he'd screamed. I actually started tearing up. Because despite everything happening upstairs earlier, I loved him. I genuinely loved him. And in that exact moment, I realized cheating isn't always about lacking love. Sometimes it's about selfishness. About wanting two incompatible feelings at once. Safety and excitement. Comfort and danger. Devotion and desire. I hugged him so hard people started clapping. And while everyone celebrated around us, my eyes lifted over Ethan's shoulder toward Mason. Big mistake. Because Mason looked jealous. Not angry. Jealous. And for some deeply broken reason, that affected me. The rest of the night blurred together after that. More drinks. More music. Some people went to sleep. Others kept partying outside by the lake. Around 3:30, Ethan got sick from drinking too much. I helped him upstairs while he apologized between dry heaving like his existence was inconveniencing me. That's who he was. Even at his worst, he worried about everyone else. After he finally passed out, I sat beside the bed watching him sleep. And I swear to God, I almost woke him up to confess everything right there. I even rehearsed the sentence in my head. I kissed Mason. Simple. Clean. Honest. But fear is powerful. Fear of losing someone who genuinely loves you is stronger than people realize. So instead of confessing, I quietly left the room. And that's the moment I crossed the line completely. Because deep down, I already knew where I was going. The downstairs lights were mostly off now. Only the kitchen lamp and TV glow remained. Mason sat alone on the back deck overlooking the lake, nursing a drink. He looked up when the sliding door opened. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Cold wind hit my legs through the oversized hoodie I borrowed from Ethan earlier that night. Another detail that makes me sick now. Mason finally broke the silence. He asleep. I nodded. You should be with him. I know. But you're here instead. That sentence hung between us. I should have gone back upstairs. Instead, I sat beside him. Close enough that our knees touched almost immediately. And neither of us moved away. There's a specific moment before you ruin your life where everything still feels reversible. For me, it was sitting beside Mason on that freezing deck while the lake reflected moonlight behind us. One choice. That's all it would have taken. Stand up. Go upstairs. Sleep beside my boyfriend. Wake up ashamed of a kiss, but still salvageable. Instead, I stayed. Mason took another sip from his drink before speaking quietly. You're shaking. It's cold. That's not why. He was right again. I hated how easily he read me. The silence between us became dangerous fast. Not awkward. Heavy. Like both of us knew the next few minutes mattered more than either wanted to admit. I should go back upstairs, I murmured. Mason nodded. But then he asked, Are you going to? I didn't answer. Because I already knew the truth. The thing nobody tells you about temptation is that by the time you're asking yourself whether it's wrong, part of you has already decided. Mason leaned back in the chair, studying me carefully. You know what's messed up, he said. What? I tried not to want you. That hit harder than it should have. Maybe because Ethan loved me in such a stable, predictable way that hearing raw desire again felt intoxicating. You're drunk, I whispered. I was attracted to you sober too. My stomach flipped. He moved closer slowly, giving me every opportunity to stop him. And I kept failing every opportunity. His hand brushed my thigh lightly through the oversized hoodie. Not aggressive. Not rushed. Almost worse because of how patient he was. You know what the problem is? He murmured near my ear. I swallowed hard. What? You keep looking at me like you want me to make the decision for you. That sentence stripped away every excuse I had left. Because he was right. I wanted him to take control so I wouldn't have to admit I was choosing this too. I remember looking toward the staircase leading upstairs. Toward the room where Ethan was asleep wearing the necklace chain box lid tucked beside the bed because he'd been too excited to put it away properly. Then I looked back at Mason. Big mistake. He kissed me again. And this time I didn't pull away. The chemistry between us was terrifying because it felt less like romance and more like collision. Months, maybe years of tension exploding at once. Still, even then, there was a line we hadn't crossed yet. Until Mason whispered, Come upstairs with me. 3 words. That was the real point of no return. I froze instantly. Reality slammed back into me so hard my chest hurt. Mason, you can still say no. That almost made it worse. Because he wasn't pressuring me. He was leaving the choice entirely in my hands. And somehow that made me feel even more exposed. I stood up first. Not because I'd fully decided, but because part of me wanted movement instead of thinking. Mason followed quietly behind me as we stepped inside the dark lake house. Most lights were off now. The only sounds were distant snoring, the TV downstairs, and the wooden floor creaking under our feet. Every step upstairs felt surreal. Like I was watching another woman destroy her relationship in real time. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped completely. I can't do this. Mason paused behind me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he said softly, "Okay." Not angry. Not manipulative. Just calm acceptance. And weirdly, that made me turn around. Because some horrible selfish part of me expected him to fight harder for me. Instead, he respected the boundary immediately. Which made me want him more. I hate admitting that. I stepped closer again slowly until we were almost touching. "Mason." His jaw tightened slightly. "You don't have to convince me," he said quietly. "I already know this is a bad idea." Then why didn't either of us stop? Simple. Because by then, wanting had become stronger than logic. And a few minutes later, while my boyfriend slept one room away on his own birthday night, I crossed the final line I could never uncross. I'm not going to describe every detail of what happened in that room. Honestly, I don't think the physical part is what destroyed my relationship anyway. It was the emotional insanity of it. The secrecy. The adrenaline. The fact that Ethan was literally one door away while I betrayed him. That's the part that still keeps me awake sometimes. Mason led me into one of the empty guest rooms at the end of the hallway. The lights stayed off except for moonlight coming through the curtains, which somehow made everything feel even more unreal. The second the door closed behind us, reality hit me again. Hard. "What are we doing?" I whispered. Mason looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Something we probably shouldn't." I should have stopped it right there. Instead, I kissed him first this time. That detail matters because for months afterward, I tried rewriting the story in my head. Tried pretending he manipulated me somehow. But the truth is uglier. I chose it. Every part of it. And the worst thing? For a while, I didn't even regret it. That's the truth nobody wants to hear. For those first moments, all I felt was intensity. The kind that consumes your entire brain until nothing else exists. Mason touched me like he'd imagined it for years, and that level of desire can make people incredibly stupid incredibly fast. But the illusion cracked eventually. It happened because of something small. Very small. My phone buzzed. Just once. I glanced toward the nightstand automatically. Ethan Redhart. Even now typing that makes my stomach twist. I checked the message while breathing hard and immediately felt ice flood my chest. "You okay?" "Woke up and you are gone." That single text destroyed the fantasy instantly. Suddenly, I wasn't living in some reckless movie scene anymore. I was a woman cheating on a man who trusted her completely. I sat up immediately. "Mason, stop." He backed away the second he heard my tone change. "What happened?" I showed him the message with shaky hands. For the first time all night, Mason actually looked uncomfortable. "He's awake. I have to go." I grabbed my hoodie off the floor so fast my hands were shaking. Panic finally hit full force now that reality had returned. Because what was my plan exactly? Sneak back into bed beside my boyfriend after cheating on him during his birthday? Pretend everything was normal? I suddenly felt disgusting. Mason stood quietly near the edge of the bed watching me spiral. Then he said the one thing I didn't expect. "You should tell him." I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "What?" "You heard me. You seriously think confessing this at 4 in the morning on his birthday is a good idea?" "No," Mason admitted. "I think hiding it will destroy him worse later." That pissed me off immediately because he was right. And I didn't want him to be right. "You don't get to suddenly act noble," I snapped. Mason's expression hardened slightly. "I'm not acting noble. I'm saying he deserves honesty." That sentence hit like a slap because Ethan actually did deserve honesty. More than almost anyone I'd ever met. And I'd failed him completely. I left the room without another word. The hallway felt freezing now. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deafening while I walked back toward our bedroom. My heartbeat was so loud I thought I might actually throw up before reaching the door. Then I noticed something that stopped me cold. The bedroom door was slightly open, and the bed was empty. For a full second, my brain stopped functioning. Then I heard footsteps downstairs. The panic I felt in that moment was indescribable. Not fear of getting caught cheating. Fear that Ethan already knew. I stood frozen outside the empty bedroom staring at the unmade bed while my pulse hammered so hard it hurt. Then I heard the footsteps again downstairs. Slow, not rushed, which somehow made it worse. I pulled the hoodie tighter around myself and walked toward the staircase, trying to look normal, even though nothing about me probably looked normal. The house was nearly silent now. Most guests had passed out. The TV downstairs flickered quietly across the dark living room. And Ethan was standing alone in the kitchen drinking water. The second he looked up at me, my entire body locked up. Because there's something terrifying about eye contact when you're hiding something catastrophic. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah." He frowned slightly. "You weren't in bed." I went downstairs for water. Another lie. Ethan studied me for a second longer than usual. I genuinely thought it was over right there. That somehow he could see it written across my face. Then his expression softened. "Come here." That almost broke me instantly. I walked toward him slowly, and he wrapped an arm around my waist while leaning against the counter. "You've been weird tonight," he murmured. Every nerve in my body screamed. "What do you mean?" "I dunno." He shrugged tiredly. "Distracted. Because I had just cheated on you upstairs with your former best friend." I nearly confessed right there. I swear I almost did. The words were physically sitting in my throat. But then Ethan kissed my forehead gently and said, "Still, thank you for tonight. Seriously." And I couldn't do it. Cowardice won again. "I'm glad you're happy," I whispered. "I am." That sentence gutted me. He looked exhausted from drinking, eyes barely staying open. "You coming back to bed?" "Yeah," I said immediately. Then disaster almost happened. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Both of us looked up automatically. My blood turned to ice. Because I knew exactly who was still awake up there. Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly toward the staircase. "Mason's still awake?" I forced myself not to react. "I guess." He took another sip of water before shaking his head. Dude always moved like a ghost. For one horrible second, I thought Ethan might go upstairs. If he had, everything would have exploded instantly. Instead, he just sighed tiredly and took my hand. "Come on." "I'm dying." Back in the bedroom, Ethan collapsed onto the bed almost immediately while I stood near the dresser pretending to organize things because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. He noticed. "You cold?" "A little." "Get over here." I climbed into bed beside him carefully, feeling physically sick. And then came the moment I truly started hating myself. Ethan wrapped himself around me in his sleep almost instantly. Comfortably. Trustingly. Like a man who had absolutely no reason to think the woman beside him had betrayed him less than 20 minutes earlier. I stared into the darkness for what felt like hours. Unable to breathe normally. Unable to escape my own thoughts. Because guilt after cheating isn't dramatic at first like movies show. It's quieter. Heavier. A slow realization that you've permanently altered something invisible between you and another person. Around sunrise, I finally drifted asleep for maybe an hour. Then screaming woke the entire house. Real screaming. Not playful yelling. Angry. Violent. Male voices. I shot upright instantly while Ethan jolted awake beside me. "What the hell?" Another crash echoed downstairs. Then someone shouted, "You think I'm stupid?" Ethan froze. Because it was Mason's voice. And immediately after came another voice filled with rage I had never heard before. Ethan's cousin Ryan. My stomach dropped instantly. Because Ryan knew. Everything collapsed in less than 5 minutes. That's the terrifying thing about secrets. You spend hours, weeks, sometimes years building lies carefully. And then one stupid detail destroys everything instantly. Ethan rushed downstairs before I could even process what was happening. I followed behind him with my heart pounding so violently I thought I might faint halfway down the stairs. The entire house was waking up now. Doors opening. People confused and half asleep. Ryan stood in the kitchen absolutely furious, while Mason leaned against the counter looking exhausted and dangerously calm. Then I saw it. A gold foil wrapper sitting on the kitchen island. Opened. My blood turned cold so fast I physically stopped moving. Ryan pointed at Mason. You seriously brought a girl here during his birthday party? Mason didn't answer immediately, which made this infinitely worse. Ethan looked between them confused. What's going on? Ryan grabbed the wrapper and held it up. I came downstairs for water and found Romeo over here throwing this away at 6 in the morning. Nobody spoke. I couldn't breathe, because I knew exactly where it came from. And apparently Mason hadn't hidden it well enough. Ryan kept going. So unless someone had a secret hookup last night. Then he stopped talking. Because he noticed my face. That moment still haunts me. You know those scenes in movies where someone realizes the truth all at once? It looked exactly like that. Ryan's expression changed first. Confusion. Then suspicion. Then horror. He slowly looked from me, to Mason, then toward Ethan. Oh no, he whispered. Ethan frowned immediately. What? Nobody answered. I wanted to disappear. Mason finally spoke quietly. Ryan, stop. Wrong thing to say. Ryan stared at him like he wanted to punch him through the wall. Are you kidding me right now? Ethan looked completely lost now. What the hell is happening? I remember opening my mouth to speak. Nothing came out. Because there was no version of this that ended without destroying him. Ryan looked physically uncomfortable. Like he desperately didn't want to say it. Then Ethan turned toward me directly. And the second he looked into my eyes, I think part of him already knew. What happened? He asked quietly. That tone shattered me more than yelling would have. Not angry. Not aggressive. Just confused. Trusting. I started crying instantly. And that was enough. I literally watched realization hit him in real time. No, Ethan said immediately. Like his brain rejected it before fully accepting it. No. Nathan, I started. With him? That question broke something inside me because of how betrayed he sounded already. I tried to speak again, but my throat completely locked up. Ethan looked at Mason next. His former best friend. Then back at me. And suddenly, the room felt tiny. Everyone else in the house had gone dead silent. Nobody moved. Nobody even pretended not to listen anymore. Ethan's face lost all color. You're joking, he whispered. I shook my head while crying harder. Not because I meant no. Because I physically couldn't form words. And unfortunately, that looked exactly like confirmation. Ethan stumbled backwards slightly like somebody hit him in the chest. Mason stepped forward instantly. Ethan. Don't. I have never heard a human voice sound like that before. Pure devastation. Not rage yet. Just damage. Ethan looked back at me one final time before asking the question I'll probably hear in my head forever. On my birthday? Nobody answered. Because what could possibly make that sentence better? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then came the unexpected part. Ethan laughed. Not normal laughter. The kind people do when pain overloads their brain. He rubbed both hands over his face and nodded slowly to himself like reality had suddenly become absurd. Wow, he muttered. Then he looked at Mason. You really are exactly who I thought you were. Mason didn't respond. And then Ethan looked at me. That was worse. Because there wasn't anger in his eyes anymore. Just disappointment. Which somehow hurt infinitely more. I expected chaos after that. Screaming. Crying. Maybe even a fight. Instead, the entire house became horribly quiet. And, honestly, that silence was worse. Ethan just stood there staring at me while everyone else awkwardly looked away, pretending not to witness the destruction of a 4-year relationship in somebody's kitchen. I kept waiting for him to explode. He never did. That somehow made me feel even more disgusting. Because if he'd screamed at me, part of me could have focused on defending myself emotionally. But he looked crushed. Like somebody reached into his chest and physically pulled something out. I didn't sleep with her to hurt you, Mason said finally. Terrible sentence. Absolutely terrible. Ryan immediately snapped. Oh, that makes it better? Shut up, Mason muttered without looking at him. Ethan laughed again softly to himself. Not amused. Broken. Then he looked at me directly. Did you want him? I started crying harder immediately, which answered the question before I spoke. And that's the thing about betrayal. Sometimes honesty arrives accidentally. I don't know, I whispered. Wrong answer. I saw it hit him instantly. Because what he heard wasn't uncertainty. What he heard was, yes. Ethan nodded slowly like he was trying not to completely lose control in front of everyone. Okay. Just that. Okay. Then he walked past me toward the living room. I grabbed his arm instinctively. Please don't leave. He stopped moving but didn't look at me. You already left, he said quietly. That sentence still destroys me. Because he was right. Emotionally, morally, mentally. I had already abandoned him hours earlier. The room stayed dead silent while Ethan pulled his arm away gently. Not violently. Gently. Like he couldn't even bring himself to hate me properly yet. He grabbed his car keys from the table. Ryan immediately stood up. You shouldn't drive right now. I'm fine. You're not fine. Ethan ignored him completely. Then came the moment that permanently changed how I see myself. He turned toward me one last time. Eyes red. Voice exhausted. And asked, did you ever even love me? I swear to God, I felt my heart physically break hearing that. Because despite everything, I did. That was the horrible truth underneath all of this. I loved him deeply. And I still destroyed him anyway. Yes, I said immediately. Ethan stared at me for a long moment. Then nodded once. That's the scary part. And he walked out. The front door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. Nobody moved afterward. The silence became unbearable. Ryan looked at Mason like he genuinely wanted to kill him. You're unbelievable. Mason rubbed both hands over his face tiredly. I know. Then Ryan looked at me. Honestly? His expression toward me hurt worse. Because there was no anger there. Just disgust. How could you do that to him? He asked quietly. I didn't have an answer. Not a real one. People always want cheating to have some dramatic explanation. Abuse. Revenge. A dead relationship. But sometimes the answer is uglier and simpler. Selfishness. Impulse. Ego. Wanting attention. Wanting excitement. Wanting to feel desired without thinking about consequences. That's what makes cheating so terrifying. Ordinary people are capable of it. Ryan eventually left too after muttering something about checking on Ethan. Then suddenly it was just me and Mason standing alone in the destroyed aftermath of one horrible night. He looked at me carefully. You should call him. He won't answer. Probably not. I sat down at the kitchen table and finally started crying hard enough that breathing hurt. Not graceful movie crying either. Ugly. Embarrassing. Shaking. Mason stayed standing nearby for a while before quietly asking, do you regret it? That question should have had an instant answer. Instead, I froze. Because regret and desire were still tangled together in the worst possible way. And realizing that made me hate myself even more. It's been 8 months since that night. Ethan still hasn't forgiven me. And honestly, I don't think he should. People online love simple endings. They want the cheating girlfriend to either become a complete villain or collapse into instant regret and redemption. Real life is uglier than that. Because the truth is I regretted it and still missed parts of it at the same time. That contradiction messed me up for months. After Ethan left the lake house, he blocked me everywhere for almost 3 weeks. The only reason we eventually spoke again was because we shared an apartment lease and a terrifying amount of intertwined lives. Furniture. Bills. Photos. Future plans. For years doesn't disappear cleanly. When he finally agreed to meet me, it was at a quiet coffee shop near our old apartment. And seeing him again nearly shattered me. He looked thinner. Tired. Like somebody who suddenly questioned his own judgment about everything. That's what betrayal really does to people. It doesn't just hurt them emotionally. It rewrites their confidence in reality itself. I remember sitting across from him, barely able to hold eye contact. He spoke first. Did you love him? Not do. Did that hurt? No, I answered honestly. Then why? There's no satisfying answer to that question. I tried explaining the attention. The tension. The excitement. The way I'd started feeling emotionally numb in parts of our relationship and confused attraction for missing passion. But halfway through explaining, I realized something horrifying. Everything I said sounded selfish because it was selfish. Ethan listened quietly the entire time. Then he asked, "Do you know what destroyed me most?" I shook my head. "The fact that I trusted you completely." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Not the yelling. Not the breakup. That? Because trust is invisible until someone breaks it. And once it breaks, people start questioning every memory attached to it. Toward the end of the conversation, I finally asked the question I'd been terrified of for weeks. "Do you hate me?" Ethan looked out the coffee shop window for a long time before answering. "No." That surprised me. Then he continued, "But I don't feel safe with you anymore." I genuinely think that was the moment I understood the damage fully. Cheating isn't just about sex. It's about making someone feel emotionally unsafe with the person they trusted most. After that conversation, we never got back together. We tried talking casually for a while. Sometimes he'd answer my messages. Sometimes he wouldn't. But every interaction felt haunted. Especially because of Mason. And no, before anyone asks, Mason and I didn't become a couple. That's probably the most ironic part of this entire story. Whatever existed between us burned fast and died ugly. Because once the secrecy disappeared, reality showed up. Turns out relationships built from betrayal aren't exactly stable foundations. The last time I saw Ethan in person was 3 months ago. Completely by accident. I was leaving a grocery store when I spotted him near the parking lot talking to a woman I didn't recognize. And for the first time since the breakup, he looked genuinely happy, relaxed, light again. He noticed me too. For a second, we just stood there awkwardly. Then he gave me a small, polite nod. Not angry. Not warm either. Just distant. Like I'd become someone from a previous life. And honestly, I deserved that. The worst part of all this isn't that I lost him. It's knowing I became one of the painful stories he'll probably carry into future relationships forever. One selfish night permanently changed how someone who loved me experiences trust. And if I'm being completely honest, that's something I'll probably feel guilty about for the rest of my life.